I always knew my brother had a knack for messing up my life. Growing up, he turned everything into a competition he always tried to win. When I was 10, he'd sabotage my science projects. When I was 16, he convinced a friend of mine to dump me the night before the homecoming dance. But I never expected him to strike in a way that would shake my entire family. His betrayal didn't just cost me an ex-girlfriend, it damaged the trust I had in my parents too. I never truly forgave him, and I always thought I never would. Still, for the sake of family gatherings and holidays, I tried to be civil. Many said I was naive, hoping for a truce that never came. He'd act polite if people watched, but that smug grin appeared when it was just us. Our parents ignored his manipulative side. They saw him as the golden child, while I was the sensitive younger son who overreacted. Eventually, we drifted apart. I moved out of state, he stayed behind. Life moved on, or so I thought. Then I met the woman I would marry, assuming my brother would forever remain a distant memory. When my fiancé and I planned our wedding, we agreed on a small, drama-free ceremony. My parents tried to push for a bigger event, but we stood firm. I made it clear, my brother would not be invited. They nodded, pretending to respect my boundary. Weeks later, everything seemed set. We had a final head count, secured a modest venue, and felt confident. Then my mother started dropping hints. She'd ask if I was really okay leaving out certain people. She'd claim relatives might be hurt. I brushed it off, convinced she'd never go behind my back. I was wrong. 3 weeks before the wedding, I got an unsettling text from an unknown number. It said, "Classy move, excluding your own brother, C." My stomach dropped. I called my mother, demanding answers. She played innocent, claiming she had no idea how Calvin got the details. My father mumbled vague excuses. My fiancé suggested we hire security or warn the venue staff, but I didn't want to escalate. A part of me hoped Calvin would just stay away, knowing he wasn't welcome. Deep down, I suspected my parents had done exactly what I begged them not to do. On our wedding day, I tried to focus on my bride, our vows, and the friends who came to celebrate. The ceremony went beautifully. My wife and I exchanged rings, shared a kiss, and walked out as husband and wife. I felt a surge of joy, momentarily forgetting the family tension. We moved to the reception hall, greeted relatives, and got ready to enjoy our meal. Then I heard my brother's voice behind me, congratulating me like we were best friends. I turned to see him grinning, standing with my parents. My heart pounded with anger. I glared at my mother, who avoided eye contact. My father tried to smile, babbling about how it was a family occasion. Calvin introduced his pregnant wife, Sarah, who looked uncomfortable. I told Calvin he wasn't invited, and he just shrugged. The guests nearby began to notice the tension. My wife squeezed my arm, guiding me away before I caused a scene. We found my best man, who asked if I wanted Calvin thrown out. I hesitated, thinking about the spectacle. I resolved to handle it more subtly. I was done letting them walk all over me. The reception began smoothly, despite my boiling rage. Speeches were planned for later, so I had time to plan what I'd say. I watched Calvin laugh with my parents, saw Sarah pick at her food, and felt my resentment growing. I remembered how Calvin betrayed me in the past. He didn't just steal my girlfriend, he laughed about it and never showed any remorse. My parents acted like I should just move on, but I couldn't. Now they'd gone behind my back, inviting him to my biggest day. I decided that my wedding toast would be my moment of truth. When it was time for the toast, my best man spoke first, praising our friendship. Guests cheered as he finished with a warm wish for our future. Then I stood, microphone in hand, feeling adrenaline course through my veins. I thanked everyone for coming. I mentioned how important loyalty and respect were to me. My parents shifted uneasily. Calvin gave me a forced grin. I said that while I appreciated genuine support, I couldn't ignore betrayal. Then I laid it all out. The story of how my brother had seduced my ex-girlfriend, shattering my trust in him and my parents. The room went silent. My mother tried to interrupt, but I held up a hand. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. I spared no details, explaining how Calvin orchestrated secret meetups, how he reveled in my humiliation. I told everyone that my parents defended him, telling me to get over it for family harmony. I glanced at Sarah, who looked pale and shaken. Then I concluded with a toast to honesty, saying I refused to let anyone rewrite history. I wished my wife and me a marriage built on mutual respect, not lies. Sarah stood abruptly, demanding to know if this was true. Calvin tried to wave it off as ancient history. He claimed it happened only once, but I revealed it was a full-blown affair lasting months. The crowd gasped. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She ran out, and Calvin scrambled after her, ignoring our parents, who were frantically calling after them. The whole reception erupted into chatter. My wife took my hand, supporting me. I felt a strange combination of relief and triumph. I had exposed the truth, and it was liberating. I had no sympathy left for Calvin. My parents rushed to my side, hissing that I'd ruined the reception. They accused me of airing dirty laundry and humiliating them. I told them they had only themselves to blame. They invited Calvin despite my explicit wishes. They knew how deeply he'd hurt me, yet they still tried to force a happy family narrative. Now they were dealing with the fallout of their own actions. Guests were whispering, some looking appalled, others appearing impressed that I stood up for myself. My wife's parents tried to comfort me, saying it was my right to speak the truth. I stepped away, letting the band resume the music. People slowly returned to their meals, though the atmosphere felt heavier. My wife guided me outside for a moment of fresh air. She told me she was proud that I finally stood my ground. She knew how much I'd been bottling up, especially with my parents always excusing Calvin's behavior. We agreed that, despite the tension, it was better to have everything out in the open. I held her close, feeling grateful she was in my corner. Then we went back inside, determined to enjoy what remained of our wedding night. Calvin eventually returned, minus Sarah. He looked furious, trying to confront me near the dance floor. He spat accusations, saying I was petty for choosing my wedding to expose him. I shot back that he should have stayed home if he didn't want his secrets revealed. Our father stepped between us, telling me to calm down. I reminded him that this was my wedding, not Calvin's. If anyone needed to leave, it was Calvin. My brother sneered, then stomped off. My mother, tears streaking her face, begged me to make amends. I refused. They'd broken my trust for the last time. My best man intervened, leading me away from the spectacle. He said I didn't owe Calvin anything and that I shouldn't let them ruin my night. We tried to salvage the celebration. We cut the cake, shared a dance, and let the photographer capture what smiles remained. Many guests stayed, offering kind words and support. A few relatives looked disapproving, but I was past caring. My bride and I focused on each other, reminding ourselves why we were there. The event wrapped up with a subdued but meaningful sense of finality. I felt both drained and oddly satisfied. The next morning, text messages poured in. Extended family members gave me their opinions. Some applauded me for taking a stand, others scolded me for being vindictive. My parents left voicemails demanding I call them. I let everything sit. My wife and I had a short getaway planned, so we packed our bags and left. During our drive, she held my hand, telling me she was proud of me. We both knew the fallout would be massive. But it was our wedding, and we had the right to protect it from people who cared more about appearances than genuine respect. While on our short trip, I turned my phone to silent. We wanted a break from the chaos. On the second day, my wife checked her messages and found a series of texts from Sarah. She apologized for the unexpected drama, explaining she'd only come because Calvin insisted they mend fences. She revealed that she'd suspected him of cheating before, but hadn't found concrete proof. My revelation was the final straw. She had left him, taking her belongings and moving in with a friend. She wrote that she intended to file for divorce, unwilling to stay with a proven liar. We were shocked, though not entirely surprised. Calvin's track record spoke for itself. Sarah asked for any information or evidence I had, in case she needed it for custody. She wanted to protect her unborn child from a man who had zero integrity. My wife and I agreed to help. We let her know we had old messages and emails referencing his affair. She thanked us, saying it confirmed her decision to leave. Part of me felt bad she had to experience this at such a vulnerable time, but another part felt relieved that Calvin was finally facing real consequences. After we returned home, I couldn't avoid my parents forever. They showed up at our apartment unannounced, complaining that I had gone too far. My mother accused me of destroying Calvin's marriage. My father demanded I apologize and convince Sarah not to divorce him. I refused. I reminded them that Calvin's own actions destroyed his marriage. If they wanted to blame someone, they should blame their golden child. They threatened to cut me off, and I laughed. I told them I was done being manipulated. I had a new family now, my wife, and I wouldn't bend to their demands anymore. Over the next few days, calls came from various relatives. Some wanted the full story, others tried to shame me. I remained calm, repeating the facts. Calvin was unfaithful, not just once, but multiple times. He showed zero remorse. My parents disrespected my wedding plans by inviting him without my consent. I simply told the truth in my toast. If that ruined their image of a happy family, then maybe the illusion needed to die. My wife and I stood united. We started blocking numbers when the harassment got out of hand. We refused to be their scapegoats. Sarah reached out again, thanking me for the evidence. She had confronted Calvin with the proof, and he finally admitted to multiple affairs. She filed for divorce and requested primary custody of the child. My parents sided with Calvin, claiming Sarah was overreacting. They tried to paint her as hormonal and irrational. Sarah forwarded me messages my mother had sent, claiming, "Boys will be boys." It was enraging, but not surprising. My mother had always turned a blind eye to Calvin's misdeeds. Now she was enabling him once more, trying to guilt Sarah into staying. Sarah was having none of it. Calvin then attempted to contact me directly. He left a long voicemail accusing me of orchestrating a plan to ruin his life. He called me petty and vengeful. He insisted that we should have handled this privately. I listened once, then deleted it. No response. To me, he'd always been a toxic force. I was done letting him leech my emotional energy. If he wanted to fight, he could do it in court. Sarah had an attorney, and I was ready to testify if needed. I wasn't going to hide the truth just to make him feel better. A few weeks later, I heard through a cousin that Calvin was staying with our parents, jobless and miserable. He kept blaming me for his downfall, refusing to acknowledge his own actions. My parents doubled down, saying I should have been the bigger person. I found it ironic that the bigger person was expected to remain silent while the manipulator walked free. I stayed firm in my stance. My wife fully supported me, reminding me we had every right to maintain boundaries. We continued to build our life together, free from the drama my family insisted on dragging behind them. Eventually, my parents begged me to reconsider. They wanted to hold a family meeting to resolve the conflict. I told them I had no interest in reconciling. I reminded them that they'd lied to me and sabotaged my wedding by inviting Calvin. They'd shown they valued his presence over my peace. My father argued that Calvin was still my brother, that I owed him loyalty. I countered that loyalty is earned, not automatically granted by genetics. They threatened to never speak to me again. I called their bluff, replying that it was their choice and I wouldn't lose any sleep. Sarah's divorce proceedings moved fast. She was determined, and Calvin had few resources to fight back. My parents tried to fund a lawyer for him, but he couldn't deny the evidence of his infidelity. The court seemed ready to grant Sarah nearly everything she sought, including full custody. She sent me updates, grateful for the truth I'd shared. Each step she took away from Calvin felt like closure for me, too. The child would grow up free from his toxic behavior. Maybe Calvin would change one day, but I doubted it. He'd never shown an ounce of real remorse. As time passed, I focused on my marriage. My wife and I began planning a real honeymoon for our anniversary, hoping to erase the stain of that wedding drama. My best man joked that our wedding would go down in history as the ballsiest toast ever. I started therapy to process the family betrayal and learned how to assert boundaries more effectively. It felt empowering to finally let go of any lingering guilt. I realized that my parents had enabled Calvin for decades and that he thrived on their coddling. I wouldn't let their dysfunction control my life anymore. Even so, there were moments I questioned my actions. Late at night, I wondered if I could have handled it differently. But every time I replayed the events, I concluded that my wedding was my day. My parents and Calvin had no right to hijack it. If the truth coming out destroyed Calvin's marriage, that was on him, not on me. I recalled the smug texts he'd sent, the laughs he had at my expense. He made his bed, and now he lay in it. I wouldn't apologize for telling the truth. My sense of justice wouldn't allow it. A month later, I got a letter from my parents. They wrote that they were disappointed in me for tearing the family apart. They claimed I was ungrateful for everything they'd done. They also said they refused to acknowledge my wife as part of the family until I made amends. That letter confirmed I'd made the right decision. If they were willing to attack the woman I loved just because I stood up for myself, then I wanted nothing more to do with them. I tore the letter up and tossed it. My wife and I moved on. Sarah officially finalized the divorce soon after. She sent me a polite message of thanks, explaining that she didn't need me to testify because Calvin conceded to most of her terms. He'd lost his marriage and would have limited contact with his child. She mentioned that my wedding toast was the catalyst that exposed everything. She hoped I found peace in knowing the truth set her free. I wished her the best, feeling relieved that she'd escaped. It felt like justice. The man who took pleasure in betraying me had now destroyed his own future through his reckless behavior. My parents tried one last stunt. They showed up at my workplace unannounced, demanding I talk. I asked them to leave, but they refused, causing a scene in the lobby. Security escorted them out. After that, I changed my phone number and made sure my employer knew not to let them in again. It hurt to cut them off, but they'd shown no respect for my boundaries. I couldn't keep living under their manipulative control. My wife stood beside me, offering unwavering support. We both understood that family was more than blood. It was respect, trust, and love. So here I am, months later, without any contact from my brother or parents. My life is infinitely less stressful. My wife and I are happy, planning a proper honeymoon and focusing on what truly matters. I won't say the road was easy, but I have no regrets. My wedding day was supposed to be about celebrating love. Instead, it became the day I finally exposed a lifetime of lies. I don't forgive them. They've shown they deserve no forgiveness. I've found my peace in speaking the truth. In the end, that was the best revenge I could ever take.